Countdown's number 2 story, tonight's worst person in the world. The Minnesota Congresswoman Michele Bachmann. The runner-up, U.S. Representative Michele Bachmann of Minnesota. Our runner-up, the gift that keeps on giving, the bizarre Minnesota Congresswoman Michele Bachmann. The silver, the elected representative you'd at least like to be the lawyer for at a sanity hearing, Congresswoman Michele Bachmann, who represents a district evidently populated by the inattentive in Minnesota. But the winner, the most un-American member in the American House of Representatives, Congresswoman Michele Bachmann, Republican from Minnesota. And our winner, Minnesota Congresswoman Michele Bachmann. But our winner, Michele Bachmann, about to begin her second term as the least stable member of your U.S. House of Representatives. Ballyhooing a Republican economic stimulus plan that gives tax breaks to corporations. Hey, it worked for Herbert Hoover. But listen to Ms. Bachmann. I am so proud to be from the state of Minnesota. We're the workingest state in the country, and the reason why we have more people that are working longer hours. We have people that are working 2 jobs. Our slave labor produces better pyramids than the slave labor in any other state in the Union. Explaining that drilling for oil in the Arctic National Wildlife Reserve in Alaska would be beneficial for the wildlife there because the warmth of the oil in the pipeline causes a, quote, enhancement of wildlife expansion and would, quote, become a meeting ground and coffee clutch for caribou. Hilarious Jonah Goldberg and comedian Rush Limbaugh read off similar talking points last week. The caribou herd in the area, though, where they're already doing the drilling, has reduced the area they migrate in by 78 to 90%. And the caribou herd in the area where the new drilling is proposed migrates across a much larger area, so it would likely thin out quickly with much of its migration area cut in half by a freaking pipeline. The heat of the pipeline is good for them. It's a coffee clutch. For God's sake, you people elected this woman to Congress. Telling Ingram that the Democrats in Congress are so intent on blocking new energy sources that, quote, they won't even pass the tax credit for solar and wind right now. 4 times this summer, the Associated Press reports, Senate Republicans blocked action on the legislation that would establish tax credits for renewable energy entrepreneurs in fields like solar and wind. And when a similar bill came up in the House, Bachmann voted to block it. Actually, Representative Bachmann could herself be the solution to the energy crisis if we could just harness her hot air. She did an interview with a right-wing religious website about the Republicans' gimmick to demand a vote on their gimmick to increase offshore oil drilling so it can drop the price of gas 10 years from now, maybe. Nancy Pelosi, says Congresswoman Bachmann, is, quote, committed to her global warming fanaticism to the point where she has just said she's just trying to save the planet. We all know that someone did that over 2,000 years ago. They saved the planet. We didn't need Nancy Pelosi to do that. I don't know who you mean, Congresswoman. I mean, I would guess that you're talking about Jesus. But since you act like you think you're Jesus, I'm just assuming you're referring to somebody else. She read into the congressional record part of an article from the right-wing publication Investor's Business Daily, which purports to explain the mortgage crisis by blaming a Clinton-era rule change. Congresswoman Bachmann read aloud that the rule pushed, quote, Fannie and Freddie to aggressively lend to minority communities, to offer, quote, home ownership as a way to open the door for blacks and other minorities to enter the middle class. In other words, Congresswoman Bachmann blamed the meltdown on blacks and other minorities. In other words, Congresswoman Bachmann is a racist. Congresswoman Michele Bachmann of Minnesota, today's worst person in the world. Now saying she regrets going on hardball and suggesting there were, quote, anti-American, unquote, members of the House and the Senate and that Barack Obama might be one of them, but it's Chris's fault. Chris Matthews laid a trap and I walked into it. She says she'd never seen the show before. She also claims she did not, quote, call for an investigation of members of Congress for their pro-American or anti-American views, even though she insisted the media should conduct exactly that kind of, well, the word she used was expose. That would make her a liar. She's got bigger problems, though. Not only has her Democratic opponent, Elwyn Tinklenberg, raised about $1 million since her remarks, but the National Party has put $1 million more into his campaign. And Huffington Post now quotes two sources in the ad agency business in Minnesota who say the National Republican Party has pulled the ads it was buying for Bachmann. Bye. Michele Bachmann, as of today, a likely lame duck congresswoman and today's worst person in the world. It's just 3 weeks ago tonight that she went on hardball and suggested that there were members of Congress and Senate, including Senator Obama, who held anti-American views, and the media should investigate. Well, Congresswoman Bachmann has now told Politico.com that she is, quote, extremely grateful that we have an African-American who has won this year. She called Obama's election, quote, a tremendous signal we sent. Exactly who's this we, Congresswoman? People who voted for him? I'm thinking you weren't one of that we. The people who viewed him as an appropriate and patriotic choice for executive? Well, you called him anti-American, so clearly you aren't one of that we either. The collective voice of the United States? Well, yeah, you're in that we. And in fact, you do deserve some credit for Obama's election, because thanks for reminding the rest of us how quickly things could go horribly wrong when unscrupulous hypocrites get into the mix, and how vigilant we have to be when they start trying to divide us. Congresswoman Michele Bachmann of Minnesota, by the way, nice face, both of them. Today's worst person in the world.